Tashi, and today we have a different video. Today we're going to talk mostly about inflation. If you may know, everything is getting more expensive unless you're not using your card. You may have noticed that too. Whether it's housing, food, cars, anything, much more expensive. The Federal Reserve has been trying to fight inflation, meaning everything getting more expensive, for the past couple of months by increasing interest rates in a historical high amount. I mean, we haven't seen interest rates these high for almost now 10 plus years. It seems like looking back, if you look at historicals, that we're following trajectory we saw 40 years ago when we had hyperinflation. Tomorrow we're gonna see the new release of the CPI report, the new inflation report that shows year-over-year data on a monthly basis. Last month it was around 8.3%. We were not happy with that, and that's why we saw a 75% basis point increase in interest rate. The question is, what will we see tomorrow and how might it affect the decision of the Fed in the future? So let me start recording here. First of all, let's start with expectations. Tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. EST, the Federal Reserve, not the Federal Reserve, the Bureau of Statistics will release the CPI report, the monthly CPI report. People expect that we're gonna have an 8% year-over-year inflation in the month of October. Specific inflation is predicted to be 7.9%, so even a little better. We saw 8.3% last month, 7.9% this month. Next to nothing. The goal of the Fed is to keep inflation around 2%, so we're far from that, meaning that the Fed might increase interest rates even more, but we'll see. Now let's look at data specifically, and we're also going to look at specific data that concern inflation from articles and stuff we saw in the past month that might affect this report here. Let's start with the CPI in general. Last month's CPI was at 8.2%, and the core inflation 6.6%. And let's look at historical. So last month was September data. So prices were 8.2% higher than September 2021, where inflation was at 5.2%. So let's start with the first factor. We know that inflation in September of 2022 was 8.2% compared to September 2021, which was 5.5% compared to the year before. If we look at October 2021, inflation was already picking up much more. Prices were already higher compared to September, which means that if prices would remain the same as in September 2022, the resulting inflation report of October may be lower because the prices in October 2021 were already higher than September 2022. I don't want to get too much into the details, but I'm saying is if prices did not move at all in October compared to September, we would see a much better result than the forecast on paper. But now let's jump straight into other data. So if we go into the inflation, the CPI report of last month, and we go on all items. Actually, let's go here and we go on some of the factors of inflation. We can see that apparel, vehicles, used vehicles, medical care, alcoholic beverages, tobacco products are part of this inflation. This is now part of core inflation and general inflation. I cannot go through all these factors, but I want to show you some articles that describe some of the data that we saw in the past couple of weeks and how it possibly can affect the inflation report of tomorrow. We're going to start with new cars. And this is an article that came out at the end of October. New car prices are finally coming down from record highs. We saw car prices drop a couple of $100, set to fall to $45,000 compared to a high of $46,000. So we saw a decrease in new car prices. It's a slight decrease, it's not gigantic, but it's a reversal from the super high increases we saw on a monthly basis in this year. I mean, if you can read here, up more than 24% in the past 2 years. So it's good to see a reversal. It's not gigantic, but it could be pretty much good news. I don't think this can affect inflation too dramatically, but the fact that it did not increase is a good thing. We might see this on this month's CPI report. The only thing is, this article came out in October 2021. The question is the data from end of October, from beginning of October, or even before? If it is before, we're definitely gonna see it in the inflation report. If not, we might see it on the next one. On to used car prices. This is the most interesting one. Used car prices are actually starting to drop dramatically. The average cost of a used car dropped around $20,000 from the top around 24,000. So that's a 15% drop in the past 2 months. This could, for example, affect inflation in this section here, which is used cars and trucks. This could be really good news for the CPI report tomorrow. Will we see it? I don't know. Hopefully this data is old enough to be resulting on that inflation report. Number 3, one of the other factors that we saw is cost of apparel, cost of clothing. And if you start looking at articles, I won't go too deep into the articles, we will see that both the raw material, meaning cotton, has been falling a lot, but also the apparel in general. While the apparel in general fell only 0.3% in September, which will result in the October inflation report. Remember, the inflation in most cases is a lagging data report. The data from October is not only from October, but it's from a little bit earlier. It's not a perfect one-on-one relation. So since here they're talking about September, a decrease in apparel of 0.3%, this might result in the report of this month. Let's go also on other articles here. US apparel prices fall while overall CPI still rises. This was actually released in October 13, right after the other report from September, and it basically states that although clothing is falling in prices, it did not really, the CPI was still going up. And if we look at the data from September, very interesting, apparel it still resulted as growing in inflation, although less than the others. We gotta go now on cotton prices. We saw this, last but not least, actually not the last one, almost the last one. Food prices, one of the things that affected most of us on a daily basis. Now the food prices that have been increasing at a supersonic state, they almost doubled throughout pretty much everywhere. And if we look at the index here, you can definitely see that from the lows of 2020, 90, 160. We did not double, but we got really close to it. However, starting from mid-2022, we saw the prices decline. They're still very high compared to what we saw before, but they're declining by quite a lot. We're seeing a plateau right now, but the level should now be slowly starting to result on the later CPI reports. The thing is, the Fed does not really look at food prices too much. They mostly focus on core inflation. So although food might be affecting inflation in a positive way by lowering a little, it's not the focal point of the Fed. But it's still good to know that we have other factors that are dropping at least slightly. Last but not least, this is a very important factor. Transportation. Transportation was one of the major statistics, major factors that affected inflation in September, but also in the past. With higher cost of gasoline, logistical problems across the whole world, the transportation became very expensive. After a way that for shipping a container from China to Los Angeles, it will cost you almost 10 grand compared to the all-time low of 2 grand. Thing is, with the improvement of the supply chain and now consumption to be expected to go down dramatically, shipping rates, freight rates, container rates dropped by a lot. Shipping rates sink more than 70%. This is containers. Also flight rates for shipping decreased dramatically. 70% decrease is a lot. There were containers that went through for $2,000 compared to the all-time high we saw at the beginning of the year of 10 grand. So on top of basically telling us that consumption will go down, which again might affect prices because with lower consumptions, companies are forced to incentivize people to buy by lowering prices. We also know that shipping rates have dropped dramatically, and this, as it has been coming out towards the end of September, I believe will affect the CPI report a lot. Again, the expectation is around 7.9%, but looking at some of these statistics, we can see that many of these data points seems to be better than 7.9%. Will the report tomorrow show up as better than this? Will it show up as worse? We don't know. However, we saw some really good key points out there. In some sections, we saw some supersonic deflation, let's call it this way. 70%, for example, for shipping costs is kind of crazy, especially as it is one of the factors that affected inflation the most, 14%. It's quite a lot. So, give you the data, maybe to change your expectations, to improve your thought process. The question is what will happen tomorrow. If we're able to be under that 7.9 expected inflation, it's really good news. Will it affect the decision of the Fed? I mean, if the number will be dramatically lower, maybe that interest rate hike will be lower or there wouldn't be one. We don't know about that. If the report will show up around that, expectations I mean, of 0.5% interest seem reasonable, could be even 0.75% because 8% inflation is a lot in my opinion. And again, this is just my opinion, this is not financial advice. Guys, hope this information helps out. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Let me know what your expectation on the inflation report will be tomorrow. And we'll find out tomorrow at 8:30. I might do a live. Thank you. Ciao.